All right, welcome back to part 2 of 3 of this habit change series. This week we're going to be discussing accountability, which could also be understood as stakes. Because what you're going to be learning in this video is that it's all about making the consequences for failure real. That is, the consequences of not following through, implementing some new good habit into our lives, or the consequences of not following through, getting rid of some old unwanted habit in our lives. We're going to understand why it is so important to have something or someone keep us accountable and what exactly we're leveraging there. And then I'm going to share with you some real concrete strategies for how you can actually implement this into your plan so that it's not just this woo-woo concept for you to learn just to forget, but that you can actually use to make some real changes starting today. So let's do it. If you were to sum up the last 50 years of behavioral psychology in 2 words, it would be logic fails. No matter how good a plan is, how thorough a book is, or how sincere our intentions, humans are horrible at self-discipline. So what do? Knowing that logic fails, knowing that there's really no amount of rationale that can get us out of bed when it's first thing in the morning, and we're trying to work up the motivation to get up, put on our workout clothes and go to the gym. There's no amount of logic that can convince us in a way that motivates us to actually do that. What does behavioral psychology say might actually work? The principle is loss aversion. When directly compared or weighted against each other, losses loom larger than gains. This asymmetry between the power of positive and negative expectations or experiences has an evolutionary history. Organisms that treat threats as more urgent than opportunities have a better chance to survive and reproduce. So basically what the author is saying here, and the point that I'm trying to get across, is that as human beings, we are willing to put in more effort to avoid losses than we are to obtain gains of the same size. And the reason is because, like he said, losses tend to loom larger psychologically than gains of the same value. But we can use this feat to our advantage. If we're trying to implement some new change in our lives, and our struggle is to actually follow through, then theoretically, knowing that the pain of loss is more significant psychologically than the pleasure of gain, then if we tether real stakes to the failure to follow through in that change that we're trying to do, then that should be sufficient motivation to push us to actually follow through in it. But how do we actually go about doing that? Let's find out. Dean Carlin, an economics professor at Yale, came up with the idea of opening an online commitment store in 2006. This evolved into STICK, spelled with 2 Ks, which he co-founded based on the principle that creating incentives and assigning accountability are the 2 most important keys to achieving a goal. If you don't fulfill your commitment with STICK, it automatically tells your friends and opens you up to endless mockery. Peer pressure is good. But that's not all. You can also set up an anti-charity, an organization you so despise that you'd rather slam your head in a car door than donate to them. If you don't fulfill your commitment, your funds are wired automatically. Based on STICK's goal completion percentages from 2008 to 2011, we find that the success rate with no stakes is 33.5%. Once we add stakes, like an anti-charity, that success rate more than doubles to 72.8%. Where logic fails, loss aversion works. So the website mentioned, STICK, is an example of where you can go to implement the first tip that I have for you here, which is called commitment contracts. A commitment contract is basically what it sounds like. It's a formal agreement that you make with another entity. That entity doesn't necessarily have to be a company like STICK. It could be a friend or a colleague or a family member, whatever. But the important thing is that the commitment contract is formal. It forces you to clarify exactly what you're committing to, and then it forces you to also tether stakes to the failure, your failure of following through on that commitment so that the threat of loss is credible. And that way it's different from, let's say telling ourselves, if I fail to do this, then I will do this, because now you're in the same boat, right? If I fail to do my habit and now I have the prospect of the loss that I've made for myself, well, now I have to also enforce that I actually pay that price or whatever it was. And so we're in the same boat, versus if you do stick or something similar, you know, the company already has your credit card information or your friends list if you decide to do the public ridicule route. And so if you miss your goal, that's it. There's no way out. You know what I mean? It's a formal contract. So stick is one of the places you can go to do that. So the second tip that I have for you here is accountability partners, which is very similar to a commitment contract in that it, you know, kind of has this threat of loss, but the difference is that there's not a formal agreement between the two of you. Of course, you could make it formal by, you know, let's say the two of you, or you do it with a group of people. You make a to-do list, or a to-doist, the app, you do a to-doist group project, and you could put the rules in there and make it a commitment contract. If you don't, you know, want to make it all that formal, you could just say, like, let's say, for example, at the beginning of the year, instead of for your New Year's resolution to work out more, going to the gym on January 1st alone, you could get together with a buddy and you could say, all right, we're together going to meet up at the gym on X, Y, and Z days of the week at this time. And, you know, we'll meet each other there and then we'll work out together. That alone is probably enough to give you a pretty good amount of motivation, depending on your relationship with your friend, because just the prospect of him or her going and meeting and being there at that time and you failing to do that, that's probably going to be a pretty good motivator to actually get yourself there. Because, you know, if they get there and you're not there and you don't show up, then you're probably going to get texts from them, you're going to get ridiculed, they might talk trash or whatever. And so already you have a pretty good motivator. So it's not necessary, I don't think, to make it formal, but if you think that that's, you know, necessary to motivate yourself, then by all means. The last tip that I have for you here as we wrap up the video has nothing to do with loss aversion or accountability or anything along those lines, but it is necessary, or it is like, I do feel obliged to share this tip with you, because I've, you know, in the past I've experienced watching a video like this and getting all excited about all these tips of like how to actually force myself to make changes to make changes and then have them actually work. I've gotten all excited and then I've done the opposite of this tip. The tip is take it slow. Adopt slowly. And I know, like, I'm sure that there's exceptions out there where people have made dramatic amounts of changes and dramatic changes to their lives and actually been able to get them to stick. I'm sure that happens, but I have to imagine that it's not the norm. And more than likely, what you'll end up doing if you bite off more than you can chew, and let's say, you know, you make a commitment contract with stick for 10 different habits, and then you fail in like 2 or 3 of them and you start paying money, that's going to discourage you even further than the method you might have attempted in the past. And, you know, the discouragement then comes the less likelihood that you'll actually, you're more discouraged than before, and you're even less likely than before to actually implement the changes that you want to make. And so just be very mindful of how much you're asking of yourself, and be kind to yourself. You know, try not to compare yourself to whoever is around you or who you're watching on social media or whatever. Just say, you know, yesterday I wasn't at this place and now I am, and I can be happy with that. And you know, just this small little change, I know it's small and it feels excruciatingly slow, but if I can just focus on these 2 big habits, that just means the world to me, you know. And that's what I care about the most. That's what I want to focus on. It'll be so much better for you in the long run. So just have patience, my friends. With that said, be sure to stay tuned for next week, where I'll actually be contradicting myself, and patience will not necessarily be necessary or advisable. I'll be sharing with you this psychological tactic or insight that you can use to get immediate and dramatic changes out of yourself that you didn't think that you could pull off for, you know, very long time. The only catch is that it's short term. As far as I can tell, I've never been able to get any changes using this method to last, but it's still helpful to be able to taste success in something that you thought would take a very long time. Just being able to taste the other side of that barrier, you know, it's very exciting. So get excited about that. But to wrap up this video, remember, guys, that our logic fails us more than we're willing to admit. And so
instead of clinging to our rationale, at least according to the behavioral psychology science, what we should instead be doing is leveraging our loss aversion using things like commitment contracts and accountability partners. So that's it, and I will see you next week.